Thank you so much for coming. I'm so thrilled to introduce some amazing people associated with this great episode you just saw. Number one, I'd like to introduce one of the executive producers, Jason Clark. Music editor, Stan Jones. And Oscar-nominated, Emmy-winning composer, Mr. John Debney.
What should I say?
So you saw this episode. I wanted to say a couple of things about this episode. It was written by Brandon Braga and Andre Bormanis. And Brandon Braga wrote a lot of the episodes. I mean, he was a producer and wrote a lot for Star Trek Next Generation and then Voyager and on and on. So you have that great Star Trek lineage associated with this great series. And John Cassar, Seth wanted him to do this 2-part episode. And this was the highest rated episode, IMDb rating, 1 point higher than any preceding episode of the Orville, and over 3 million people watched the episode live when it ran. So it had a 9.4 IMDb rating. And
Wow.
Wow.
Nice.
Network television, the power.
so let's start, Jason, with you a little bit about how the 2-part series came about, and give us a little background on that.
Well, it's the finale, and they wanted to do something spectacular. And Seth really, was developing the story of the Kalon and what would happen. And it kind of, in the writer's room, it kind of advanced, and they realized they had 2 stories here, and the next episode after this is quite amazing also, and has an amazing space battle in it. But it's a... It's something about the show. Originally, each episode was to be kind of almost contained as an episodic episode with character memory between the episodes, so you kind of understand the relationships and watch them progress. But this kind of took it to the next level in that it's kind of a 2-parter, and it tells a story that in the classic sci-fi television, oeuvre, you have the ability to say "to be continued," which was there, and kind of take the story to the next level.
And also, the critics were saying that this was like a big turning point in the series, and in a lot of ways, it was more serious than a lot of the other episodes. So,
I mean, I think, and I can't speak for Seth, but I think for Seth and the writers, it was always the intention to kind of make a sci-fi show that could deal with, in a way with human foibles, but also to be serious and have comedy as almost like a whiskey shot on the side. This was always thought of as a science fiction show, and I think this episode is seminal in kind of turning the series in that direction and allowing the themes to get very serious and dark, and they really went for it.
the one thing in this episode, on Isaac's farewell speech, it seems very derivative of Sally Field's 1984 Oscar speech, saying, "You like me, you really like me." It's almost
Well, there's
verbatim.
still humor in the show.
All right, I want to start off with the process of how you all work together. So, starting from you, how does it work, and when do you start working with Stan and with John?
Well, I'll let them speak to
episode.
the process because one of the great things about working with Seth is that he has the highest level of respect for great artists, and these 2 gentlemen are great artists, and the process really is defined in part by what they need. What I try to do is protect the time that they have and to manage to that, and also whether that's time on stage with the musicians or the scope of what they're trying to do, or whether that's time to write the music or to spot it or to review it. And I'll let them talk about that process, but it all starts with a spotting session. And gentlemen.
All right, well, let me say one thing about Stan first. Stan has
Let's
worked
talk about Stan.
for many years.
He
with
was a
Seth.
skateboarder. Doesn't look like it, does he?
He's a black belt. He's a black belt.
He's a black belt, and he rides horses.
And he rides horses.
We love Stan.
Yeah, all I do is work. That's all I do.
So
He
you've
breeds
worked
standard
on-
poodles if anybody's looking for one.
True.
You've worked on American Dad, Orville, Family Guy, as well as Altered Carbon. So
Yeah, and
Ma-
Ted
ma-
and Ted. I've done
many
I've worked with Ted
simultaneously.
for Seth for 20 years. Yeah, yeah. It's been pretty wild. Yeah, but it's great because music comes first for him. So it's always like, okay, well, whatever you guys need.
So how is your process? And for example, with this episode, when did you start working on it?
Well, he locks it. He's good about making sure the show, for the most part, sometimes they'll change it after they show it to us, but he's pretty good about locking it and having a good idea of the vibe he wants, and he'll show it to John and say, well, this is kind of the feel I kind of like, and then he's like, do what you want to do, and we go through in a spotting session. We go very quickly. Most shows, we were talking about Altered Carbon, I could spend 4 hours spotting that show, and this show will spot in 30 minutes because he knows exactly where he wants all the music. There's no question about where he wants
You
it.
should tell the audience that Seth, pardon my voice, by the way, I'm just getting over some, but how Seth tempts his own episodes.
Yeah, he won't let us
Pretty
even
amazing.
see it without. He makes a pass. He likes to put temp music in it, and he just wants to make sure we know the feel, the general feel. He uses a lot of your music, or maybe even John Williams' music. He'll say, "This is what I like here. Let's go to the next spot," and that's it. And we leave. We prepare notes, like music editors should do for all composers. And John will review the notes and start working, and he starts carving it out, and he turns it
Start
over.
carving it out.
He does.
This is a unique show in that regard that I think, a lot of you maybe have sort of heard Seth speak about the show, but it's fascinating to me. He cares so deeply about music, and he's a many Grammy award-winning artist in his own right, great artist himself, great singer, but he just loves music. And it's rare to be around somebody that, I think one of the first shows I did with Jason, Seth said, we were going overtime, because that's what happens sometimes. You're working, and Seth on this particular episode was finishing shooting another episode, came in, and I think on the first thing I did, Seth said, don't worry about it, we'll come back and do another session. And that never happens. That's unheard of. And
One thing I want to say, John, to
Please.
that point is Seth supports the artistic vision of his collaborators, but most importantly, he gets a great joy out of the music. And for him, rather than that being a part of the process that requires work, that's where I think it all comes together for him. So we try to support it as much as possible with the visuals, but then to sit with these guys and go through that spotting session, and then to get to the stage is the culmination where, in some cases 80 musicians or more are involved in it. It's a great joy for him, and you can see it, and you can see that in a way he doesn't want it to end. He enjoys that process. It's a great process, but he's also incredibly supportive, and he hires the right people to work with, and that's...
He's just such a great supporter of, he loves all kinds of music, but especially the big orchestral scores that we sometimes don't hear anymore on television, unfortunately. But with Seth and with this show, as you guys just witnessed, it's never a matter of how big or small. Usually Seth will call me and go, well, you sure you got enough violins? And I'll say, 90-piece orchestra. And I'll say, yeah, I think so. And then I almost feel guilty, if we go above that. But such is a great joy and privilege that I have to work on this show.
So for Identity Part 1, how many musicians were used for that score?
Oh, my God. This was one of my biggest ones. I think it was about 89, close to 90. I always feel guilty when we cross that 90 threshold. So I think it was about 88.
89 and a half.
Yeah,
It was a
89
young
and a half.
kid
Yeah.
playing the cowbell.
And I like to hire, there's a guy that plays this instrument called the beam. And I don't know if any of you know what the beam is, but the beam was made popular in many Jerry Goldsmith Star Trek scores back in the day. So I like to hire the guy that invented the beam. So it's always 89 plus the beam. So
We should get Jerry Free to come in and play the penny whistle.
Oh, is he still alive?
Yeah, he is.
Yeah?
He still plays.
Yes?
He lives in New Mexico.
Wow. Okay.
So, all right. So, on this episode, did it differ from other episodes you've worked on in terms of orchestrally? Was it more music?
It was a little different. This one, I felt was just, I love this episode. This is probably my favorite one I've done. And I thought it was just so well written and well shot and well acted. And I felt that it would be nice to do kind of a very operatic sort of score. And you're dealing with these huge issues, you know, of AI and you know, and versus humans. And that whole scene when they go down in the catacombs and they find these millions of skulls and I thought it was brilliant. And it was fun for me in that regard to do. I wanted to find a little theme for the Kalons, which was kind of this big muscular sort of theme. And then I wanted to be rather operatic because you're talking about the destruction of the human race, potentially. So that was kind of what drove me. I wanted to create something pretty cool that you don't hear in television music these days.
Well, what we want to do is, okay, so John has picked 3 different clips and from different episodes, and what we're going to do is play one of them and talk about exactly musically how that went into it. So do you want to set the first one up? It's going to be All the World's is Birthday Cake.
Yes. Well, again, one of the great joys for me on the show is to be able to do different styles of music. And this one, this is 205?
205. Yeah.
See, I know that we know the shows by the numbers.
Episode
By
205.
the numbers. And this one is really cool because it's sort of dealing with our cast of characters and Captain Ed Mercer, and they're discovering, or they get a signal from this civilization, an undiscovered civilization, undiscovered country. And so they go and they meet with them. And this first piece was a really lovely piece. I'm just blessed to be able to write this kind of music for this show. But this first piece is an entree when we get the message, the emergency message, and then we go off and our crew is now going to go meet and discover these undiscovered civilization. And so I wanted to write something very big and exciting and beautiful. And Seth told me, he said he wanted it very propulsive and expectant. And so that's kind of what's going on with this thing. And in the middle, you'll see a little bit of a change where it gets almost sublime. It gets beautiful. You come through the clouds. Don't want to spoil it, but you come through the clouds and you see the civilization for the first time.
And this, the concept is first contact, which is the Orville's mission, is if they ever got a signal and they could make this first contact. So, of course, it's this kind of exciting moment for the crew.
Right, episode 205.
Is that Northridge?
Yeah, that was shot at Northridge, Cal State Northridge.
So on this, in terms of, you say Seth gives you like a temp. Yeah. How close are you from the temp? Do you Good question. Do you start completely from scratch? After?
It gives me an idea and gives us an idea of what his intentions are, and he's very good with his temp. You know, he's such a great musician, so he'll put in. I don't know what he temped this with, but
I don't know. It could have been Jerry.
it's usually Jerry Goldsmith.
Yeah, that's a big. You know.
That's a big favorite.
Yeah.
And I don't know if some of you out there, some composers, I did throw in my little homage to James Horner, which I love doing because James was a hero of mine, a hero of a lot of us, everybody probably in this room. And James Horner gave me really my first job, really gave me my first opportunity. So whenever I can, I like to give a little nod to the guys that I really love and respect. And anyway,
What was that first opportunity? Well, you said James.
Oh, well, it very simple story. James Horner was going to do Hocus Pocus, which was a Disney film back then. And he had to bail at the last minute. And I had, through a series of circumstances, I got hired. And I had 2 weeks to write like 90 minutes of music. Wow. And I was young and impetuous, and I didn't sleep, and I drank a lot of coffee. So I don't know if I could do that now. But anyway, so James Horner did something very kind for me. Back then, he recommended to the producer that, hey, yeah, John would be great, or something like that. So I'm always thankful, because had he not done that, I don't know if I'd be sitting up here with these guys.
Didn't it just celebrate the 30th anniversary?
I think it's 25th.
25th anniversary,
Yeah,
sorry.
but yeah, who's
Just a-
counting? Who's
Just,
counting?
I just want to mention something. A lot of what you see we don't have when the film is turned over to these gentlemen. And John has to imagine a lot of what's going to be there. And, if that's in some scenes, maybe not so much this one, but in some scenes, that's 40, 50% of the action or the events that are happening on the screen. So it requires a really deft hand. And also, it puts a lot of pressure on the time that you guys have to either spot or write, because sometimes when that material comes in later, it could also change what we have, change the length of what we have, but more importantly, it could also inspire those sting moments. When is the explosion? When are these things happening? So that everything fits well. And one of the great artistic things you see is when the writing seamlessly supports stuff, even though they didn't have it. It's almost like you imagine. How do you deal with that?
That's a great point. I don't know, with a show like this especially, as you guys know, the visual effects on the show are mind-boggling, and they're only getting better and better. But many times we've got green screen, or we don't have much to look at. So to answer the question, many times Seth will hear a demo that I've done, and he'll go, yeah, I love it, love it. He's always so positive. And he goes, I love it. There's this one spot, where you went big and heroic, but it's really, we're not there yet. It should be a little darker, because so many times Seth will have to explain to me exactly what it's going to be. And that's the process that we have. It's very cool, because many times we have no idea. We'll spot this thing,
Right.
and he will describe something, and it'll be different.
Right. Sometimes we get to the scoring stage and Seth is there. He'll say, and actually we at the hours before we score, I'll try to get the latest picture, because they're constantly changing it and not necessarily conforming the length, but at least we can see the latest version. And John, who's great at doing this, and a lot of composers cannot do this, he'll make changes right from the podium, saying, okay, well, you know what, we can change this, and we'll make that get there a little quicker, and this will help embellish this sequence. And it's constantly an art or work in progress. It's really cool to
It's
get
kind
to
of
watch
fun for me. I don't know why. And these two guys have seen me week in and week out. I kind of love that.
It's like flying a 747 blindfolded.
It is.
And
It really is.
And
Some
then
people
you,
might
and
be
then
really
you compliment
afraid
his
of it.
landing. Well, that was very smooth,
Yeah.
John. I
Yeah.
didn't notice that at all.
Yeah.
And you
I'll
changed it on
see
the
them.
stage.
I'll see Jason, I'll see Stan, and because sometimes Seth will come up with something completely different than what we thought, even from what I presented in the demo. And that's fine, because he's a genius, and something will come up to him. And so Stan and I and Jason will kind of look at each other, and I love it, because that's when I have the most fun. I have the most fun because I'm looking at the clock. I'm not going to let these guys down. I'm not going to let them down. And so I'm going to do my best to get it creatively for Seth exactly the way he wants. Many times, Seth will go, oh, it's great. And I'll go, give me one more. And that's the most fun, because that's our job. Our job is to fulfill the creative vision of a guy like Seth.
One thing is, I just want to say, one thing that's worth mentioning about that is that we don't usually get those resources. Normally, it's a much smaller orchestra. You're under a much larger time constraint, and so when you do get these incredible opportunities that Seth gets because of all of the things that he's been able to do, and obviously everyone from the top down understands his love of music, you end up with that 90-piece orchestra, and you're going to do everything you can to give it that theatrical big sound that you can, because at the end of the day, working with these guys, but also that orchestra, it's something that you'll listen to, I don't know, 20 years from now and probably go, wow, how do they do that on TV?
Oh, and unless I've this, but they love it. The orchestra, and I think I can speak for Joel McNeely and Andrew Cotty,
And Bruce
and Bruce Brown. The orchestra eats it up because the opportunity for them to come in and to play at such a high level and very difficult music. Most every week, it's on the edge of being almost unplayable sometimes, but they love it, and it's just a delight. It's a delight to see the look in their eyes and how we're going to get that one more take, and it's a joy. It's a joy.
And I think that the show has more musicians than any other TV show in history. I think more than even The Simpsons. So
yeah, it has to. Yeah,
here in Los Angeles,
yeah.
But it also has a lot of music. I mean, some of these episodes are more than half of them are scored because it's a drama, because it has space and battles and these kind of big non-dialogue sequences. It's not a play-on, play-off type of show. It's like it's a music show.
And what's the turnaround time?
I mean, sometimes we have 3 or 4 shows turning around simultaneously, which is difficult. But I'd say 2 to 3 weeks.
And just to give this guy a lot of credit, there's 3 of us writing the scores, but there's one Stan who's not only doing this show, but he's doing other.
Well, you can have 2 episodes, because I know at one time we had about 5 episodes.
Yeah,
out.
I kept asking for more. I told Jay, give me more, whatever.
Like,
I love it. It's a unique, wonderful gift.
And when we talk about those visual effects shots, there was 7,000 visual effects shots in this season of television, over 500 shots per episode. So you can imagine how much of the show you guys don't really get in a way that's complete or finished or visually clear just yet. So even though their time, even if somebody has 3 weeks, it's not 3 weeks with the entire show. It's 3 weeks with 500 of maybe 1,000 shots. So 50% is still in progress.
Now, 3 or 4 days later, after the scoring session, we'll be on the dub stage, and more shots are coming in. I'm like, oh my God, this looks completely different than it did on the scoring stage.
So many times Stan, being
we
the
have to
great editor he is, he'll make an adjustment, and it's seamless. And the great ones, when I see it on air, the great ones, I don't even know the cut they made, and I don't ever know. He does. I don't ever know the cut he makes because it's so great.
Yeah.
It's brilliant.
Well, let's play another clip. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, episode 213. So you want to give us a little background on
You're
this?
probably asking why. No. Well, this one was cool because Seth very specifically told us in the spotting session. When about midway point through, once the ship has been iced, Seth wanted to go very, very sparse because he knew there were going to be a lot of effects, and I thought it was a terrific choice because the reason I picked this was to show how the marriage between sound effects and music can be utterly engaging, because at the first part of this music, it's very big and very bold, and then when the ship is iced and now it's stealthy, I thought it was a terrific choice, and our great music and sound on this show, they just killed this. So that musically, I had to get very thin and let the sound effects play, and I think that's an important lesson in general. It's a marriage. We're not competing against each other. We're actually in a symbiotic relationship.
I would give a shout out to John, our sound supervisor, who just, what a panic phase.
King Sound, John Greasley is who he's talking
we would
about.
get to the dub stage, and I'm like, okay, well, the music's going to be okay, because Seth is very careful about the changes he makes, so it's not going to really affect music. But now all of a sudden there's another 200 or 300 visual effects that are different, and he's now trying to reconstruct and cut them on headphones while we're mixing. Wow. And it's just, it's an insane amount of work, and then you're up at that point. And this is common now in this town because of the ability. We were able to get visual effects changes so quickly, and it's grueling, but it's a very common place to conform or change the sound and the music on the stage through the process, where they wouldn't even try to do it years ago. It's commonplace now, and
it's quite remarkable to watch
really
the process, because
a beautiful thing to watch when they're doing it and doing it well, and you're seeing, oh my God, all these new effects, and trying to listen to the music and making sure that like pitch and we're not getting in the way of each other. And this will play, but that shouldn't. Maybe we'll take that away. And we have to still do it on a TV schedule. The mix is still only like 3 or 4 days, where a film you might have 3 weeks to do that same amount of work. And
We really are pressed, all of us, creatively, by the scale of what we're trying to accomplish in the time that we have. And this scene was particularly interesting, I think, John, also because every time we're outside the ship, none of that existed when we were doing the spotting session and say we have 3 weeks or 3.5 weeks to write the music. So whether there's a little bit of previs or there's some kind of example that gives you an idea of what it is, it's not real until it's real, meaning whether that's sound effects or music, there are going to be stings and moments and things that are discovered in the creation of those shots that don't really. So it's a creative process in which we have these compressed timelines, and then you arrive at the stage with 90 musicians, and you can't be unprepared. So you have someone like John and Stan who have done the homework and arrived there and are able to make those changes in those moments. And part of my job is to make sure they have everything we can possibly give them at that scoring session. So sometimes that's not everything they need. And that's where the trick of all this. And then we go to the scoring stage, and it's our ambition to have all the effect shots done, but we're on such a tight schedule. I mean, we're scoring on, in some cases, the Friday before the Thursday air, and in some cases, the weekend before the Thursday. Some of these shows, I'm not scoring, we're mixing the weekend before. And so we're going into this as late as possible to have the most of the picture done, but it's also really challenging because you're right up against an air date. You don't really have time to say, we'll come back and, rescore. And then we took the whole operation to New York for part of the time, which was just at a level of difficulty that well, we did good.
I have a question. Is this the most complicated television show of all time?
I don't know. I mean, there's been all sorts of shows that are difficult.
I mean, I worked on
Different
Next Gen, and I worked
Right.
on, and of course, that was a long time ago, and so the effects were what they were. But what do you think, Jason?
I think
really
it's complicated because of what we can accomplish. As Stan said, you couldn't do that before, but now we can do it.
Yeah.
So we take advantage of those opportunities, and if that means we're not doing 250 effect shots, but we're doing 500 effect shots, and we aren't putting, in Next Gen you had curtains with little Christmas lights in them, and they were on rollers, and you'd roll them through the screen, and that was the ship moving. That's all green screen that we're seeing, or blue screen, and we're replacing all of those shots with star fields, and whether that star field is moving at quantum, whether it's static, whether it's at regular drive, all of those things are, whether it's going forward or backwards, all those decisions have to be made. So it's not just throw a star field up, it's like determine which direction, what side of the ship you're on, how all that stuff is moving. So even those easy things become complicated, but you're still in that same compressed time frame because we have set air dates. It's not like a Netflix show where you say, okay, we're going to drop this when we're done. Let's finish all 10 or 12 of them. So it has some challenges in network television that are unique.
I love it, though. I love the idea of still being able to see what's going to come next week. I love that, but that's, of a generation.
It's pretty cool to show up on a scoring stage and get to work and have John come out, and there's like a 90-piece. I've done TV for 35 years, something like. This is just off the chart. Sean Murphy.
Yeah,
It's
let's
just-
talk about Sean Murphy.
Yeah, so this is a consistency now. We have one
Yeah.
scoring mixer, same guy that does all of John Williams stuff.
Sean Murphy, give him a shout. On the show, we've just been describing to you, we have the creme de la creme of everyone, from effects and producers and music editors. And last year, I brought in an old friend of mine, Sean
Yeah,
Murphy,
you brought him in. Yeah.
who's one of the greatest scoring mixers of all time, doesn't do television.
No.
And I brought him in, and the sound, which I knew what it was going to sound like,
Yeah, I know.
the sound that came out was just
Insane.
insane. And so Seth immediately
And he was
goes,
just like, what?
Wait.
I just
You were
turned around-
there.
I just turned around and watched him. I've been watching
Yeah.
him for years. I'm like, and he's just,
didn't Seth turn to you and go,
he's like, well,
Yeah.
he's just unfinished little statements. He's like, I've never, because he's been sitting in that room forever as well. For the last time he was, I've never this, and he was just blown away. It was great.
So the great new part of that is that Seth made the decision to get Sean Murphy to do every score this year.
Yeah.
And what a joy! And that is a big part of this. Also, is the sound of the music. It's not only a big orchestra, but it's the sound and how it fills the screen out.
Sean
you
will
know?
be flying back from Boston,
Yeah.
literally on a 4:00 in the
Literally.
morning flight,
And
coming over
Seth,
and scoring here,
yeah.
and then actually we were mixing simultaneously some of our shows in New York and trying to all keep everything sounding consistent. And yeah, it was.
For me, it was a great education to understand what somebody does there. Just one little insight I had that's worth mentioning is that all the miking, when you have 90 musicians in a room, and it's a room this size, let's say, and everybody's in the same room, where the mic is placed is such an important part of the tonality, the sound. I'm not sure what is the alchemy of it all, but somebody like Sean is intimately involved with the exact placement of that stuff. So when it comes to the board, it's not just the levels he's choosing there, but it's how the sound is reaching that mic and how it's picking up those instruments. And when you multiply that by 90 instruments playing all at once, now there is a fascinating, I don't know what the word is, like alchemy of events that he's able to then give that sparkle to. And that's where your jaw drops a little bit and you go, wow, that's incredible. And it's live.
And, you hear it. You hear it immediately. There's just nothing like it. We're so blessed to have Sean on this thing, on the show. And to me, Sean gets a clarity and a depth that sometimes we're not able to get. And again, on a show like this, it's so important, like a Star Wars or any of these other big, huge cinematic event movies. Sean knows how to get that and how to give everything its space. And it is alchemy. It's magic. I don't know how to say it.
All right, now we have one more clip, and maybe we need to play a little shorter so the audience can ask some questions after.
Sure.
So, Blood of Patriots. Yes. Do you want to give a little?
The reason I picked this is one of those things where Joel McNeely and I think we're having a little unspoken contest. Who would get the longest cue, the longest piece of music of this year? I think Joel beat me.
I don't know. Is this 8.5?
This is 9.
No, it is. Well, the whole clip is 12 minutes.
12
and 21
minutes.
seconds.
So we don't have to watch the whole thing, but it's a great sequence. And our character, who's our guy? Who's the character's name? He meets his best friend, Gordon. Anyway, I don't want to spoil it, but there's a big scene that you're going to see. We'll get about halfway through it, and then there's a fight scene, and there's another fight scene, and it's kind of, I want to just simply illustrate, first of all, how great the sequence is, and secondly, how do you make it interesting for 9 minutes? And again, we'll see how long you last, but here we go. And we did it in sections. Maybe should have.
Yeah, that's a whole other.
Anyway. So, thank you.
I think that has to be the longest clip in the.
I think that's probably the longest one. There's a little break. But there's so many things going on in there, and that's why I wanted to bore you with it, because there's a lot, there are so many things, especially with this show, or a show like it, but especially this show, where when we're on the bridge, many times Seth will say, no, keep the pulse going, keep the energy going. And he's right, because even though we've got this long sequence, we want to keep the interest and the excitement going. And so this was a real, kind of a testament to that.
Well, let's open up for. We have time for a couple of questions. Gentleman right here. How many Wait.
That's a very good question.
Yeah.
What was the question again?
And I usually keep track of that.
Wait. He's gonna bring you a microphone.
Where?
It was very seamless. I was just wondering how many different takes did you do and put together to make this whole sequence?
No, great question. I think it's we broke it up really for the musicians because it was nonstop, really. So I would say it was, how many do you think? 4 sections?
Maybe 4 sections, and then there could be 5 or 6 takes, maybe more.
5 or 6 takes per section.
And maybe sometimes and then we start breaking it down by bars, like from bar 35 to 47 or something. We'll just like keep going after that to get it right and make sure that we can make the edits so it sounds seamless. Yeah, that's the idea. Yeah.
That's Dan.
That's
no,
Dan.
honestly, it's a luxury. This show almost edits itself, and with John conducting and these players, we go back and forth and listen to where we can make edits, and it's just like it's easy compared to a lot of the other stuff that I have to edit. So.
Well, I don't, you're so good at it. He's being humble. But I do think Sean Murphy helps us too,
does,
because Sean will go, okay, if you're going to go from bar 25, just give me.
Yeah, why don't we do 2 more bars?
Let's
ahead of
do 2
that?
more
It'll
bars.
be easier for Stan to make the edit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there's a give and take in the booth,
Yeah.
Stan and Sean, constantly about where to kind of do it. And it's really cool because I'll just sit back and go, what do you guys think? And then we'll do 2 or 4 bars before, and
Yeah.
there you go.
Yeah, it's amazing because there's a sheet that we put together, and there's actually 2 people doing it. That's the luxury on the show. We have actually Christine's doing it, and I'll have one going, and Sean is actually making a mark, and so we can go back and reference where the best place to go to pick up like just getting bar 9, and it's makes it much easier. But yeah, it's work, but it's pretty straight ahead because everything is for the most part is being done to a click. And so it's going to be the same every time we do it as far as tempo to places to make cuts. And yeah, that's great. And honestly, I'm not just, when you have somebody out there that's nice and calm and conducting and really just making sure that everybody's like, because sometimes you run into maybe and like, uh-oh, this is not working out. This is not hitting anything. And it's like, okay, well, wait a minute. Let's take a look at it and back up and go after it again, and it kind of works out. It's just a little scarier to do it when there's like 90 players out there.
Okay, we'll try to do 2 more.
Yeah, sure. Yep.
Right there. First, I want to thank John Debney Jr. for putting these clips together for us.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. This is really inspiring, and I think a dream for a lot of us to get to work with an orchestra like this, especially on a TV show. I wanted to ask about the process of, first of all, your writing process. Are you sequencing, or are you sketching? And also, in terms of doing mock-ups, are they detailed mock-ups that Seth's approving, or is it just quick sketches?
Great question. I mock everything up. I play it into the computer. I used to, I started with pencil and paper, and I love doing that. But, these days it's much easier for me to present a fully realized demo for Seth. And I think it's really helpful because, so to answer your question, I don't sketch. I think Joel does, or Andrew does. The other guys on the show do. But I've been finding out, certainly for a long period of time, that your demos are everything. And I want to make sure when Seth hears it, or anyone I'm working with, or Jason hears it, or a director hears it, it's got to sound great. And it's been helpful on this show because Seth, I don't know if he normally listens to demos, but at least for my experience has been that he's very much enjoyed that, hearing what it really will sound like, very close to what it'll sound like.
Usually, so the music ends up, it comes to me, the demo comes to me, and then I'll build it. And normally for most producers or directors, I would be mixing it, or they would be getting it with dialogue and effects, some sort of balance. And for Seth, this is just weird. He has all the dialogue in the show memorized, and he knows where all the effects are going to be if they're not there already. And he doesn't want to hear anything but the music. That's the only person I've ever worked with that's like that. And he's just like, no, I don't want to hear any dialogue.
This show's unusual that
Yeah.
way. It's almost, we produce it in a way that I noticed that network television wasn't used to, which is that Seth is really acting as a filmmaker would on a movie. So we write all of these before we start filming them. Then we film all of them, and generally we're done filming, and then we post all of them. And it's during the post process, or really relatively soon after we finish shooting, that we start airing them. A lot of television, all of those three processes are happening simultaneously, but Seth has an intimate understanding because he's involved from the writer's room. So by the time he gets to the music, frankly, he's been living with these scripts, acting in them, in there for 120, 140 days of filming, of whatever it takes to film all this. He does know all this dialogue because of that. He does know the visual effects from the conversations that have been had over the course of it. But to hold 13 hours or 14 hours of that in your head, it's a testament to his passion about this, and also that his trust. Like, he wants to hear the music, only because he wants to hear the emotional underpinning of the shows that he's doing, and allow that to play, and everything else then becomes additive. So it's really interesting because you have everything built up, then you take it all out, and it's a subtractive process, and now you just have the music, and you say, oh, that's the emotional compass of what we're building here. And he can reference that other stuff. He can hold it in his head. But it is also a process that really allows John and Stan to do their job and be bold.
Yeah, and I hope that answers your question. I do it. That's what I do now. I'll demo, and the demos are very good. And at least I've been told that. Stan likes them.
No, they sound great, and I'm hearing them from all.
And so Stan's hearing them, and
They sound really good.
Sometimes, oftentimes we'll
Yeah, we'll go
talk
back and
even
forth.
before Seth hears it, and he'll hear something, or he may clue me into something that Seth might react to,
Yeah, it
and
might
it's
bring
really
it
helpful.
down a little bit or up dynamically. It might
And
be
that's the beauty of this
Yeah.
relationship, is that he knows Seth far better than I do.
true. No, you know what?
You know him really well.
I know that every time it can be different, and for some wild or great reason, I can never second guess him. That's the weird.
Well,
thing.
he does,
We try.
and he does have it all in his head.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. He'll call me on let's say I've delivered a bunch of cues, or Stan has delivered a bunch of cues to him, and he'll usually call me on like a Sunday afternoon at 4, and just nice as punch, and saying, hey, it's great, and then he'll give me very, very detailed notes, and really good notes. Many times there are things I didn't even
I
realize.
don't think he writes it down either. does
He doesn't write it down. So I always go, hey, Seth, let me get my pad.
Yeah,
So
'cause-
we're like old school, with pad and paper.
Yeah.
And it's so funny. You don't even know this, but I'll write them down on a yellow pad or an envelope or anything I can find. And so I have these little things stuck in my pocket so that when I go back into the studio the next morning, I'll pull out these little, or those cards you get in magazines, subscription things. I'll write on those or whatever I got. So sometimes I'll lose those, or they'll be in the car somewhere, and I've got and I'll have to find them. But anyway, it's a little funny thing. But I've always got. He's so detailed. He's got time. He goes, around 1 hour, 4 minutes, and 30 seconds. I think from there to like a 5-second stretch, and he'll go, I think you can be a little bit bigger or small, whatever. And he's got it all. So yeah, the fact that
And I know he's listening to it or looking at it on his phone.
On his
And-
phone.
Yeah, and I'm really careful about making the mix so it sounds. I double check these
Yeah.
cues on my phone.
before he,
I do, and I want to make sure that the download, whatever it's going to be, he's going to put up with if it takes a minute and a half to 2 minutes, because he. And I've done this for a long time. I've chased this. It's a very scary. I'm going to make sure that he's in a good place. We try to time it out. I'm like, hey, John, is it okay? What do you think if I send it about 2 o'clock this afternoon?
we
We do
talk like this,
all the time.
and he's like,
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe
later.
not right now.
Yeah, and I'll actually check
Yeah.
with other
Don't
people.
send it at 10 o'clock in the morning.
Right, and I actually will check with Crispy or
On a weekend,
so
yeah,
What's
if
the,
you want.
what's the vibe? Is it a good time to be sending cues to get notes? And yeah,
So that's
But
that's
I-
all a part of it.
I will say also, one of the things that's very complicated, because you have all these kind of incredible artists, these guys, and then the musicians and Sean, and you create this incredible music, and then it has to be blended with sound with the, through the mixing process, and which is, incredibly challenging. But then it goes out on all these different formats, so the compression's all different. So some of it is just absolutely astounding what you hear or don't hear in that way. So when you talk about he plays it on the phone or whatever that is he playing it on DAX? Because DAX compresses differently than a QuickTime, and QuickTime compresses differently. And then you could be losing certain tonal ranges of the music. So nowadays, having all of this flexibility for people to listen to it for this artistic kind of collaboration, you also begin to lose stuff and levels, and it's some of it. And then on broadcast, one of the things they do is they control the amount, the levels, and the range of levels. And in that control sometime, and then they do the compression, sometimes you go, well, so much is lost in that, where you could hear the horns, you can't hear them anymore. It's a very complicated
I wish
process.
everyone here could stand at Fox and listen to what this sounds like on the scoring stage. It is just, it gives you, there's something wrong with you if you don't almost like shed a tear on, it's just insane. And then broadcast is just horrifying. and it's also, and then we immediately, at least I do, I like unplug my phone and I run around because I know that like phone calls are gonna happen, and it's like, why did this happen? Why does it sound like that? And this is just something everybody is chasing in television now anyways, and this show being so dynamic and so huge at times, and it causes all sorts of weird compression issues and limiting issues, and it's horrible.
It sounded really good in here.
Yeah.
Were these QuickTimes?
I don't know. Were these quick?
No, it sounded good. I mean, when I walked in, it sounded good, and yeah, I mean, it sounds good. Yeah.
No, it
yeah.
was from the DVD.
I get really picky, and
But,
because
yeah.
I'm around somebody, I work for somebody that will sitting back. We're sitting here, we're working on a mix stage, and he'll say, at like 3 minutes and 35 seconds, there's a laser blast. Was that the same one that we heard last year? It should be the same. Can we just go to? And sure enough, out of like three, oh my God.
And then
Really?
finally the sheepish, well, I just changed it a little bit.
Yeah.
No, go back to what we had.
Yeah, we got.
I mean,
it's got to be the
it's
same. It's got to be the same. And the same thing with the backgrounds, and the same thing of every ship, like layers and levels of the ship. It's not for children. This is hard, really hard on that level for somebody that's that picky and remembers everything. And it's so nice about it too. And I'll hear about it. It's like, well, in Family Guy in season 3, and like it was episode 4, there was this thing in Act 3. And we go back and listen. I'm like, we just look at each other like, really? How do you do that? So it makes you feel stupid.
Well, we have time for one more question. Okay, gentleman back there.
What kind of team do you have in terms of orchestration, librarian, and copyist? How big a group do you have? Because these things are pretty heavy deadlines.
I'm one of the weird old school people that I write every note, and I take really a lot of pride in that, So one of the reasons, I always do that. I have a great team. It's a very small team. I have one orchestrator, Kevin Koska, who's great. And then I have great staff people internally in my office, and Mark Graham and his team, who are probably the finest librarians and copyists and arrangers in the business. And Mark Graham will usually sit on the scoring session, and he has a great relationship with Seth. So Mark many times will give me the notes from Seth. Or if Seth's not there or something's going on or he has to relay. So it's the dream team. It's honestly the dream team. I write every note, though, and I'm very picky about that. And it helps me because then when Seth calls, I know exactly what he's talking about. And it's usually something that I know him well enough where I know he's going to react. Like there'll be one bar of music, literally, one bar of music that I'm thinking to myself, I don't know, that could be a little bit better. And Seth will go, right around, and he'll give me the time code. Sure enough, it's that bar. And I go, yeah, I can make that better. So that's the other great thing when you work with someone like Seth, who's so good and so brilliant, and you get to know each other. Now I kind of know what's coming. Sort of alluding to what you were saying, Stan. It's like, and same with you, Jace, I'm sure. You know he's going to react to something because he doesn't miss anything. So you have to be totally, I mean, I guess the great thing we talked about earlier, you have to be completely present, right? Yeah.
I was just going to say that making this show is like doing a movie a week, and not not a movie of the week, but I mean, it's a challenge, and each one of these, require the inventiveness of what happens in the space battle. How does the ship turn? Because this is all CG, or what are those effects? What are those props? We have to build them. What are those costumes? What are those makeups? But by the time you get to this final kind of part of it, which is the sound, you realize there's another entire world. And in all of it, it's great that we have Seth, who is, really the mind behind almost every decision that is made here. But he also is a great collaborator with artists. So, you talk about that one bar, but, there's all the other bars that you've written. This is a 9-minute piece, and he points out that bar. But there's such a trust in what you guys do, and and your creativity, and he allows you to be, allows these other creatives to have a partnership. So it's a great process of a collaboration, and so having the dream team is necessary to get it done in the time frame we have, but it also it raises the bar, and
It's if I can add to that, so true. Seth is the best collaborator you can have because sometimes we'll go on the stage and I will have changed something, and he'll go, you were right. Like a lot of times I'll do an alternate. Like I remember a couple of shows we did, where there was something happening and our crew was taking off of a planet, and instead of just playing taking off planet, exciting music, I thought it was such a poetic moment where the people that were left on the planet were going to die, and so there was a select group that they could rescue, and the rest of them had to stay. So the ship's taking off, and we know the planet's about to break up. So yeah, it's a ship taking off, but the subtext is everybody's going to die, and the sadness and the angst and the beauty of that moment. And I thought it was great because Seth, I did it one way, and then he said, hey, I think it should be a little more this or that. And we did both versions, and he did say, yeah, you're right. Let's use the one you did. So it's a great collaboration, and he's so sophisticated and kind that when he sees a better idea.
So that was like a 16-bar section.
Chunk.
So that those are easy to swap out. Yeah. That'll sometimes swap out the wrong one, and Seth will notice. Correct me if I'm wrong. And of course, we know he's not wrong. I think we were going to use the other version of that. I'm like, oh yeah.
Oh, that happened.
Well, it's no, not lately.
Well,
It's happened.
Anyway, suffice to say, thank you for the question, but it gives us a chance to thank all the great artists that we work with on the show.
And speaking of great artists, please join me in thanking executive producer Jason Clark,
Yeah, thank you, Jason,
Stan
for
Jones,
everything.
Thank you, Jason.
music editor, and composer John Debney.
thank you all.
Thank you. Let me just say one other thing before we leave. Thank you to Ray Costa for putting this together. And
Thank you.
And I would also just say to you guys, I'm glad you enjoyed it. This is a rare show. This is a show where we as composers and visual effects artists and music editors and producers, we really get to kind of blow it out of the park. And we're given that gift. And I don't take it lightly, and Stan and I talk about it a lot. Stan and I collectively have probably been working in this business for a while. And this is a rarity. And the fact that we're going on the 3rd season of this great show is unbelievable. And that's a testament to our crew, to our guy upstairs, Seth, to Jason Clark, and the whole crew. It's a lot of work, and it shows, and thank you for enjoying it.